The late 13th century in Anatolia was a mosaic of fractured powers and emerging ambitions, a landscape profoundly shaped by the receding tides of Byzantine and Seljuk dominion. The once mighty Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, which had dominated central and eastern Anatolia, had itself succumbed to internal strife and the overwhelming pressure of the Mongol invasions, particularly following the pivotal Battle of Köse Dağ in 1243. This defeat effectively rendered the Seljuks vassals of the Ilkhanate, a Mongol successor state, and initiated a period of political disintegration across the peninsula. Into this power vacuum, numerous Turkoman principalities, known as Beyliks, began to assert their autonomy, each carving out a sphere of influence, often at the expense of the weakening Byzantine Empire, which was itself grappling with internal dynastic struggles, economic decline, and the loss of vast territories over centuries. The Byzantine frontier in western Anatolia, once a formidable defensive line, had become porous, an open invitation to enterprising warrior bands seeking land, plunder, and glory. Among these emergent beyliks, one would rise to forge an empire that would span 3 continents and endure for over 6 centuries. The origins of the Ottoman state are traditionally traced to the Kai tribe, a branch of the Oghuz Turks, who, according to later narratives, migrated westward from Central Asia ahead of the Mongol advance. Led by Ertugrul Gazi, these nomadic warriors are said to have pledged allegiance to the Seljuk Sultan Alaaeddin Kekubat I, who granted them lands around Sogut and Domanik in the hilly Bithynian region, strategically situated on the volatile frontier with the Byzantine Empire. This territory, while modest, offered both fertile pastoral lands and immediate proximity to Byzantine holdings, providing ample opportunity for raids, or ghazwa, a term signifying warfare against non-Muslims, which became a defining characteristic and a potent ideological tool for the nascent Ottoman enterprise. The historical veracity of Ertugrul's specific exploits and the direct lineage from the Kai tribe's leadership are subjects of ongoing scholarly debate, with some historians suggesting these narratives were later embellishments designed to provide a noble and divinely sanctioned ancestry for the burgeoning dynasty. Nevertheless, the figure of Ertugrul represents the initial kernel of Turkoman settlement and military activity that would later coalesce into the Ottoman state. Upon Ertugrul's death around 1281, leadership passed to his son, Osman I, the eponymous founder from whom the dynasty and empire derived their name, Osmanli or Ottoman. Osman's early years as Bey were characterized by the gradual consolidation of power and the steady expansion of his small principality. He proved to be a charismatic and capable military leader, attracting a diverse following of Turkoman warriors, Ghazis eager for conquest, dervishes seeking to spread Islam, and even Byzantine defectors disillusioned with their own empire's fortunes or seeking new opportunities. These followers were not solely motivated by religious zeal. The prospect of acquiring land, wealth, and status in a new and expanding polity was a powerful draw. Osman's strategy was one of patient encroachment on Byzantine territories, focusing on capturing isolated forts and gradually encircling larger towns. He skillfully navigated the complex political landscape of Anatolia, sometimes allying with other beyliks or Byzantine factions when it suited his purposes, but always with an eye towards strengthening his own position. A significant turning point in Osman's early reign and a clear signal of his rising power was the Battle of Bafiyas, Koyun-Hizar, in 1302. In this engagement, Osman's forces decisively defeated a larger Byzantine army, dispatched to halt his advances in Bithynia. This victory not only enhanced his prestige among other Turkoman leaders, but also opened the way for further conquests in the fertile plains leading to the Sea of Marmara. It demonstrated that Osman's forces were more than just raiders. They were capable of confronting and defeating organized Byzantine military power in open battle. Following Bafiyas, Ottoman pressure on Byzantine cities intensified. Towns like Yenisihir were captured and became important early centers for the growing Beylik. Osman's policy was often to offer generous terms to cities that surrendered, allowing inhabitants to retain their property and religious freedoms. A pragmatic approach that often facilitated conquest and integration. He also began to lay the groundwork for a more formal administrative structure. Although his principality remained largely a frontier warrior state, the legend of Osman's dream, in which a moon rises from the chest of Sheikh Edebali, a revered religious figure whose daughter Osman married, and a tree grows from Osman's own navel to overshadow the world, became a powerful foundational myth, symbolizing divine favor and the future imperial destiny of his lineage. By the time of Osman I's death, around 1323 or 1324, the small territory he had inherited had been transformed into a formidable and expanding Beylik, its sights set firmly on the major Byzantine urban centers of Bithynia. His son and successor, Orhan I, would build dramatically upon these foundations, transforming the Ottoman principality into a true regional power, and initiating the institutional developments that would underpin its future imperial structure. Orhan's reign saw a series of crucial military and administrative achievements. One of his first major successes was the capture of Bursa in 1326, after a long and arduous siege that had likely begun in the later years of Osman's rule. The fall of Bursa, a prominent Byzantine city, was a monumental event. Orhan immediately declared it the Ottoman capital, a decision that signified a shift from a nomadic or semi-nomadic warrior band to a more settled state with an urban administrative center. Bursa would rapidly become a vibrant hub of Ottoman culture, commerce, and governance, adorned with mosques, madrasas, theological schools, and public baths, reflecting Orhan's commitment to Islamic piety and urban development. Following the capture of Bursa, Orhan continued his systematic conquest of Byzantine Bithynia. Nicaea, Iznik, a city of immense historical and religious significance to the Byzantines, as the site of the First and Seventh Ecumenical Councils and a former capital of the Nicene Empire, fell in 1331 after another prolonged siege. Its main church, the Hagia Sophia, was converted into a mosque, a symbolic assertion of Islamic dominance. The conquest of Nicomedia, Izmit, in 1337 effectively completed the Ottoman subjugation of Bithynia, giving Orhan control over the entire southeastern coast of the Sea of Marmara and placing his forces directly opposite Constantinople. This relentless expansion was facilitated not only by Ottoman military prowess, but also by the ongoing internal weaknesses of the Byzantine Empire, which was frequently paralyzed by civil wars between competing claimants to the imperial throne. Orhan astutely exploited these divisions, often intervening in Byzantine dynastic struggles, sometimes as an ally to one faction against another, in return for territorial concessions or financial tribute. Notably, he formed an alliance with John VI Kantakouzenos, even marrying his daughter, Theodora, in a move that further enmeshed the Ottomans in Byzantine politics and provided them with legitimate pretexts for intervention in Thrace, on the European side of the Dardanelles. It was during Orhan's reign that the Ottomans first gained a permanent foothold in Europe. In 1354, an earthquake devastated the Gallipoli Peninsula, causing the walls of its fortresses to collapse. Orhan's son, Suleiman Pasha, who had been active in Thrace supporting Kantakouzenos, seized the opportunity to occupy the abandoned fortifications of Simpi, and subsequently the more strategically important port of Gallipoli, Gelibolu itself. This event was of profound strategic significance. Gallipoli provided the Ottomans with a secure bridgehead on the European continent, a base from which they could launch further campaigns into Thrace and the Balkans, effectively outflanking Constantinople. The loss of Gallipoli was a severe blow to the Byzantines, signaling the beginning of a new and even more dangerous phase of Ottoman expansion. Beyond military conquests, Orhan I is also credited with significant institutional developments. He introduced the first Ottoman silver coinage, the akçe, which asserted his sovereignty and facilitated trade. He began to organize a more formal military structure, including the establishment of salaried infantry, yaya, and cavalry, musellim units, lessening the reliance on irregular Ghazi warriors. While the famed Janissary Corps would be more fully developed under his successor, the foundations for a standing army were laid during Orhan's rule. He also established the office of the vizier to manage the growing administrative burdens of the state, with his brother Alauddin Pasha often cited as the first to hold this crucial position. These reforms were vital for transforming the Ottoman Beylik from a frontier principality into a more sophisticated and durable political entity, capable of administering conquered territories and sustaining prolonged military campaigns. By the end of Orhan's reign in 1362, the Ottoman state was firmly established, territorially consolidated in northwestern Anatolia, and strategically poised on the shores of Europe. ready to embark on a new era of conquest that would lead to the creation of a vast empire. His legacy was one of visionary leadership that combined military expansion with crucial state-building initiatives, setting the stage for his successors to pursue even grander ambitions. The death of Orhan I in 1362 marked the passing of a ruler who had transformed a nascent Beylik into a formidable regional power, bequeathing to his son, Murad I, an organized state with a foothold in Europe and an ambition that stretched far beyond the confines of Bithynia. Murad I's accession, though not without initial challenges from rival claimants including his brothers, heralded an era of accelerated expansion, particularly into the Balkan Peninsula, and further institutional consolidation that would shape the Ottoman enterprise for centuries to come. Murad I was a ruler possessed of immense energy, military acumen, and a profound understanding of the political intricacies of both Anatolia and the fractured Christian states of southeastern Europe. While his father had secured a European base, it was under Murad I that the Ottomans decisively shifted their primary axis of expansion into the Balkans, a strategy that would define their imperial trajectory. One of the most significant early achievements of Murad I's reign was the capture of Adrianople, modern Edirne, from the Byzantines. The exact year is debated by historians, with dates ranging from 1361 to 1369, but its strategic and symbolic importance is undeniable. Located deep in Thrace at the confluence of several rivers, Adrianople commanded key routes into the Balkan interior. Upon its capture, Murad I made it the new Ottoman capital, a clear statement of his intent to make Europe the heartland of his expanding realm. This move was not merely symbolic. It shifted the administrative and military center of gravity of the Ottoman state firmly into Europe, allowing for more effective command and control over Balkan campaigns and demonstrating a commitment to permanent conquest rather than mere raiding. Constantinople, the once mighty Byzantine capital, was now increasingly isolated, an enclave almost entirely surrounded by Ottoman territory or that of their vassals. The Byzantines, under Emperor John V Palaiologos, were reduced to a state of intermittent vassalage, often compelled to pay tribute and provide military assistance to their Ottoman overlords. With Adrianople secured, Murad I and his trusted commanders, such as Lala Sahin Pasha and Evrenus Bey, launched a series of systematic campaigns deeper into the Balkans. Thrace was largely subdued, and Ottoman forces pushed into Bulgaria, Macedonia, and Serbia. The Balkan Christian states, weakened by their own internal rivalries, feudal fragmentation, and the devastating effects of the Black Death, struggled to mount a unified defense against the disciplined and highly motivated Ottoman armies. A crucial engagement that shattered much of the organized resistance in the southern Balkans was the Battle of Maritsa, also known as the Battle of Chernomen, in 1371. Here, a formidable Serbian army, led by Vukašin Mrnjavčević and his brother Ugljesa, who ruled territories in Macedonia, was decisively crushed by an Ottoman force. The battle was a catastrophe for the Serbian and Bulgarian states. Vukašin and Ugljesa were killed, and their lands were either annexed or their successors forced into vassalage. The Battle of Maritsa effectively opened Macedonia to Ottoman conquest and compelled many remaining Balkan rulers, including the Bulgarian Tsar Ivan Shishman, to accept Ottoman suzerainty, agreeing to pay tribute and supply troops for Ottoman campaigns. Despite these successes, Ottoman expansion was not without its setbacks. The various Balkan principalities, though often disunited, continued to resist. In 1386 or 1387, at the Battle of Plaknek, an Ottoman army under Lala Sahin Pasha suffered a significant defeat at the hands of a coalition of Serbian and Bosnian forces led by Prince Lazar Hrebeljanović of Serbia and King TVR-TK01 of Bosnia. This victory, though temporary, demonstrated that the Ottomans were not invincible and encouraged further resistance. However, Murad I was relentless. He spent much of his reign campaigning in person, solidifying Ottoman control and pushing the frontiers ever westward. In Anatolia, his policy was more cautious, but equally strategic. He expanded Ottoman territories through a combination of marriage. His son Bayezid married the daughter of the Germinid Bey, bringing significant lands as dowry. Purchase, he acquired territories from the Hamidids, and, when necessary, military force, particularly against the Karamanids of Konya, who remained the Ottomans' most significant Turkoman rivals in Anatolia. Murad I understood the importance of securing his Anatolian flank to allow for sustained campaigns in Europe. The culmination of Murad I's Balkan campaigns, and indeed his life, came at the Battle of Kosovo Polje, the Field of Blackbirds, on June 15, 1389. Responding to a growing coalition of Serbian, Bosnian, Wallachian, and other Balkan forces led by Prince Lazar, Murad I marched a large Ottoman army into the heart of Serbia. The battle was fiercely contested, and its outcome, though ultimately an Ottoman victory, was achieved at a tremendous cost. Both Prince Lazar, who was captured and executed, and Sultan Murad I lost their lives. The exact circumstances of Murad's death are shrouded in conflicting accounts and legend, with the most enduring storytelling of a Serbian knight, Milos Obilic, who feigned surrender to gain access to the Sultan's tent and then assassinated him. Regardless of the precise details, Murad I died on the battlefield, a Gazi king perishing in the midst of a holy war. The Battle of Kosovo became a pivotal event in Serbian national mythology, a symbol of heroic sacrifice, while for the Ottomans, it cemented their dominance in the Central Balkans, even though Serbia would not be fully incorporated into the empire for several more decades. Beyond his military achievements, Murad I was a crucial figure in the institutional development of the Ottoman state. He oversaw the further refinement of the military, particularly the Janissary Corps. While the practice of levying young Christian boys from conquered Balkan territories, the Devşirme system, to be converted to Islam and trained as elite soldiers loyal only to the Sultan, would be more systematically implemented by his successors. Its origins and early application are often traced to Murad's reign. This system provided the Ottomans with a highly disciplined and formidable infantry force that was independent of the traditional Turkoman tribal levies. Furthermore, the Timar system of land tenure was expanded and regularized. Conquered lands were granted as fiefs, Timars, to cavalrymen, Sipahis, in return for military service. This system not only supported a large provincial cavalry force at minimal cost to the central treasury, but also helped in the administration and agricultural exploitation of newly acquired territories. Murad I also established the office of Kazasker, chief military judge, responsible for the army's legal affairs and later for much of the empire's judicial administration, and created the overarching position of Beylik, governor-general, of Rumeli, the Ottoman European territories, who wielded significant military and administrative authority. The ascendancy of Bayezid I, known as Yildirim or the Thunderbolt, following his father Murad I's death at Kosovo in 1389, inaugurated a period of unprecedentedly rapid Ottoman expansion and a distinct shift towards a more centralized and imperial form of rule. Bayezid's epithet was well earned. He moved with astonishing speed and decisiveness, both in consolidating his own power, which involved the immediate execution of his brother Yaqub to preclude any challenge to the throne, an act that, while brutal, would become a grim precedent for Ottoman succession and in prosecuting wars on multiple fronts. He inherited a state that was already the dominant force in the Balkans and a significant power in Anatolia, but Bayezid aimed for total supremacy in both regions, driven by an ambition that bordered on the audacious and, ultimately, the reckless. In the Balkans, Bayezid moved swiftly to capitalize on the victory at Kosovo and to quell any remaining resistance. He completed the subjugation of Serbia, though it was allowed to exist for a time as a vassal state under Stefan Lazarević, the son of the fallen Prince Lazar. Bulgaria, which had already been largely reduced to vassalage, was more formally annexed, its dynasty extinguished, and its territory incorporated directly into the Ottoman domains by 1393 after the capture of Tarnovo. Wallachia, under Mircea the Elder, proved a more stubborn opponent, inflicting a defeat on Ottoman forces at the Battle of Rovin in 1395. But even Mircea was eventually compelled to accept Ottoman suzerainty and pay tribute. Bayezid's attention also turned with increasing intensity towards the dwindling Byzantine Empire. He subjected Constantinople to a prolonged blockade beginning around 1394, effectively isolating the city and tightening the Ottoman noose. He constructed the formidable Anadolu Hisari, Anatolian fortress, on the Asiatic shore of the Bosphorus to control maritime traffic and support the siege. The Byzantine Emperor Manuel II Palaiologos was reduced to desperately seeking aid from Western Europe. This plea for assistance, coupled with growing European alarm at the seemingly unstoppable Ottoman advance into the Balkans, culminated in the Crusade of Nicopolis in 1396. a large and diverse crusader army, composed primarily of French, Hungarian, German, and Wallachian knights and soldiers, led by King Sigismund of Hungary, crossed the Danube with the aim of relieving Constantinople and driving the Ottomans out of Europe. Bayezid, who was then campaigning in Anatolia, rapidly marched his forces back to the Balkans. At Nicopolis, on the Danube in modern-day Bulgaria, the Ottoman army, employing its disciplined janissaries and highly mobile Sipahi cavalry, inflicted a devastating defeat upon the overconfident and poorly coordinated crusader forces. Thousands of European knights were killed or captured. Many of the captives were executed in retaliation for an earlier crusader massacre of Ottoman prisoners. The victory at Nicopolis sent shockwaves across Europe, significantly enhancing Bayezid's prestige and that of the Ottoman military machine, while deeply demoralizing further large-scale European efforts to counter Ottoman expansion for decades. For Bayezid, it secured his Balkan flank and allowed him to turn his full attention to his other great ambition, the unification of Anatolia under Ottoman rule. In Anatolia, Bayezid's campaigns were characterized by the same speed and aggression. He was determined to eliminate the remaining Turkoman Beyliks, which he viewed as obstacles to a unified and powerful Ottoman state. Within a few short years, he annexed the territories of Sadohan, Aydin, Menteş, and Hamid, extending direct Ottoman rule over most of western Anatolia. He also seized lands from the Germanids. Despite his marriage ties to the dynasty, his most persistent rivals, the Karamanids of Konya, who saw themselves as the legitimate heirs to the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, were repeatedly defeated in battle, and their capital, Konya, was captured in 1397. Bayezid even extended Ottoman authority further east, clashing with the Kadi Burhanidin state around Sivas. By the late 1390s, Bayezid had brought a larger portion of Anatolia under direct Ottoman control than any of his predecessors, creating a vast, contiguous territory stretching from the Danube to the Euphrates. He formalized this by establishing the Beylik of Anadolu, a large administrative province mirroring the Beylik of Rumeli in Europe, further centralizing his control. This rapid and often forceful unification, however, alienated many of the dispossessed Turkoman dynasties and their followers, who resented the loss of their autonomy and viewed Bayezid's increasingly autocratic style with suspicion. Bayezid's reign witnessed a significant shift in the character of Ottoman sultanship. While his predecessors had largely maintained the traditions of a Ghazi warrior king, a first among equals, Bayezid adopted a more imperial and aloof style. He established a lavish court in Bursa and later Edirne, patronized scholars and poets, and embarked on ambitious building programs, including the magnificent Ulu Cami, Great Mosque, of Bursa, financed by the spoils of Nicopolis. His administration became more complex, with an expanding bureaucracy to manage the affairs of his burgeoning empire. This centralization of power and the adoption of more Perso-Islamic imperial trappings, while strengthening the state in some respects, also created friction with some of the more traditionalist elements within the Ottoman elite. However, as Bayezid consolidated his empire, a new and far more formidable power was rising in the east. Timur, also known as Tamerlane, a Turco-Mongol conqueror of nomadic Chagatai origin who had built a vast and terrifyingly effective military empire stretching across Persia, Central Asia, and parts of India. The paths of these two ambitious rulers were destined to cross. Several of the Anatolian beys who had been dispossessed by Bayezid sought refuge and support at Timur's court in Samarkand, urging him to intervene against the Ottoman Sultan. Furthermore, Bayezid had offered asylum to some of Timur's enemies, such as Sultan Ahmed Jalayir of Baghdad and Kara Yusuf of the Karakoyunlu Turkomans. A series of increasingly hostile diplomatic exchanges, marked by mutual insults and territorial disputes in eastern Anatolia, where their spheres of influence overlapped, escalated tensions. Bayezid, confident after his victory at Nicopolis, and perhaps underestimating Timur's strength, responded with a belligerence that only provoked the seasoned conqueror. In 1400, Timur invaded Anatolia, sacking Sivas. Bayezid, preoccupied with his ongoing siege of Constantinople, initially delayed a direct confrontation. However, by 1402, Timur had returned to Anatolia with a massive army, determined to eliminate the Ottoman threat to his western flank before embarking on a planned campaign against Ming China. Bayezid, lifting the siege of Constantinople, gathered his forces and marched to meet Timur. The two armies clashed on July 28, 1402, on the plains of Kubuk near Ankara. The Battle of Ankara was a cataclysm for the Ottomans. Timur's forces, which included war elephants and a more diverse array of troops, were numerically superior and strategically better deployed. Critically, during the battle, many of the Turkoman Sipahis, from the recently annexed Anatolian Beyliks, harboring resentment against Bayezid's rule, and perhaps swayed by Timur's promises to restore their lands, defected from the Ottoman ranks. The Serbian contingent under Stefan Lazarević fought bravely for Bayezid, but the Ottoman lines eventually collapsed. Bayezid himself, after fighting valiantly, was captured by Timur's forces, an unprecedented humiliation for an Ottoman sultan. The defeat at Ankara was a shattering blow. The Ottoman Empire, which had appeared on the verge of conquering Constantinople and solidifying its control over a vast territory, was suddenly leaderless and its armies decimated. Bayezid I died in captivity in March 1403, the circumstances of his death and treatment varying in historical accounts, though the humiliation of his capture was undeniable. Timur, having achieved his objective of neutralizing the Ottomans, reinstated many of the dispossessed Anatolian Beyliks, effectively dismantling Bayezid's Anatolian conquests. He then withdrew eastward, leaving the Ottoman state in a state of profound crisis. The sons of Bayezid would soon begin a devastating civil war for the remnants of the empire, a period known as the Ottoman Interregnum, plunging the once mighty realm into a decade of chaos and fratricidal struggle. The Thunderbolt's brilliant reign had ended in an equally spectacular disaster, demonstrating the fragility of an empire built so rapidly and heavily reliant on the person of the Sultan. The catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Ankara in 1402 and the subsequent capture and death of Sultan Bayezid I in Timur's custody plunged the nascent Ottoman Empire into a period of profound crisis and internal strife, known as the Ottoman Interregnum, or Fetret Devri. This tumultuous decade, lasting from roughly 1402 to 1413, saw the once mighty Ottoman state fragment as Bayezid's surviving sons vied for control over the remnants of their father's shattered realm. Timur, before departing Anatolia, had deliberately weakened the Ottomans by reinstating many of the Anatolian Beyliks that Bayezid had forcefully annexed, effectively reversing much of the Thunderbolt's work in unifying the peninsula. The Ottoman heartlands were now contested territory, and the very survival of the Ottoman enterprise hung precariously in the balance. Four of Bayezid's sons emerged as principal contenders for the throne: Süleyman Çelebi, İsa Çelebi, Musa Çelebi, and Mehmed Çelebi. Each initially carved out a sphere of influence. Süleyman, the eldest, established himself in Edirne, the Ottoman capital, in Rumeli, the European territories, and managed to gain recognition from the Byzantine Emperor Manuel II Palaiologos, as well as from Venice and Genoa, albeit at the cost of significant territorial concessions in Thrace and along the Aegean coast, and the humiliating acceptance of Byzantine overlordship for a time. İsa Çelebi initially controlled Bursa, the first Ottoman capital, and parts of western Anatolia. Mehmed Çelebi, later to be known as Mehmed I, based himself in Amasya, in north-central Anatolia, a region where Ottoman traditions and loyalties remained strong. Musa Çelebi initially played a more subordinate role, sometimes allied with his brothers. The early phase of the interregnum was marked by fierce fighting in Anatolia, primarily between Isa and Mehmed. Mehmed, proving to be a shrewd politician and capable military leader, gradually gained the upper hand, defeating Isa in several engagements and eventually eliminating him as a rival around 1406, thereby consolidating his control over a significant portion of Anatolia. While Mehmed was consolidating his power base in Asia Minor, Süleyman ruled relatively securely in Rumeli. He maintained a court in Edirne and, for a time, seemed the most likely candidate to reunite the empire. However, contemporary accounts often portray Süleyman as increasingly given to pleasure and indolence, which eroded his support among the more traditionalist Gazi elements and the military elite, who yearned for a more dynamic and assertive leader. The situation shifted dramatically with the emergence of Musa Çelebi as a serious contender. After initially being held captive by Timur and later finding refuge with various Anatolian rulers, Musa, with some encouragement from Mehmed, who sought to undermine Süleyman, crossed into Rumeli around 1409. possibly with Wallachian assistance. Musa presented himself as a champion of the Ghazi tradition and a staunch opponent of Suleiman's perceived appeasement of Christian powers. He quickly garnered support from disaffected military elements and frontier warriors. In a series of campaigns, Musa defeated Suleiman's forces, compelling Suleiman to flee Edirne. Suleiman was eventually captured and executed in 1411, leaving Musa as the master of Ottoman Rumeli. Musa Chelebi's rule in Edirne, however, proved to be radical and harsh. He reversed Suleiman's conciliatory policies towards the Byzantines, launching attacks on Constantinople and other Christian territories. He also implemented policies that alienated powerful segments of Ottoman society, including the ulema, religious scholars, and established military leaders by attempting to confiscate lands and impose stricter controls. His populist appeal to the common soldiers and Ghazi warriors was not enough to offset the growing opposition from the Ottoman establishment. This provided an opening for Mehmed Çelebi, who had bided his time in Anatolia, strengthening his forces and building alliances. Portraying himself as a restorer of order and traditional Ottoman justice, Mehmed forged an alliance with the Byzantine Emperor Manuel II, who was eager to see the aggressive Musa removed. With Byzantine naval support and the backing of influential Ottoman figures who had become disillusioned with Musa, Mehmed crossed the Bosphorus into Rumeli. The final confrontation took place at the Battle of Kamurlu near modern-day Samokov, Bulgaria, in July 1413. Musa's army was defeated, and he was captured and subsequently executed. With the death of Musa, Mehmed I emerged as the undisputed sultan, bringing an end to the devastating 11-year interregnum. His victory marked the reunification of the Ottoman Empire, a remarkable feat given the extent of its earlier collapse. Mehmed I is often referred to as the second founder of the Ottoman Empire for his crucial role in restoring the state from the brink of dissolution. His reign, from 1413 to 1421, was primarily dedicated to consolidation, healing the wounds of civil war, and re-establishing central authority rather than embarking on new large-scale conquests. He understood that the empire needed a period of peace and recovery to rebuild its strength. Despite his efforts to restore stability, Mehmed I faced significant internal challenges. The most serious of these was the revolt led by Sheikh Bedreddin in 1416. Bedreddin was a learned Islamic scholar and jurist who had previously served as Kazaskar under Musa. His movement, which preached a form of mystical, egalitarian ideology and advocated for the common ownership of property, attracted a diverse following across the Balkans and western Anatolia, including disgruntled peasants, dervishes, and some Sipahis. The revolt had social, religious, and political dimensions and posed a serious threat to the newly re-established Ottoman order. Mehmed I acted decisively, suppressing the rebellion with military force. Sheikh Bedreddin was captured and executed, but his movement highlighted the underlying social tensions within the empire. Another significant challenge came from a claimant known as Mustafa Çelebi, who alleged to be another son of Bayezid, one who had survived the Battle of Ankara, and was thus dubbed Düzmeşe Mustafa, or the Impostor Mustafa, by his enemies. Supported initially by the Byzantine Emperor and later by Wallachian rulers and some Anatolian beys, Mustafa launched a bid for the throne. Mehmed I managed to defeat him and forced the Byzantines to intern him on the island of Lemnos in return for an annual subsidy. In his foreign policy, Mehmed I generally pursued a cautious and pacific approach. He maintained peaceful relations with the Byzantine Empire, honoring the agreements he had made during his struggle against Musa. He renewed treaties with Venice, seeking to avoid costly naval conflicts. In Anatolia, he worked to reassert Ottoman suzerainty over the Beyliks that had regained their independence, but he often employed diplomacy and strategic alliances rather than outright conquest. He did undertake limited campaigns to restore Ottoman authority, for instance against the Karamanids, who remained persistent rivals, but his primary focus was on internal reconstruction. He invested in rebuilding infrastructure, restoring the Timar system, and strengthening the administrative apparatus of the state. His character is generally depicted as that of a prudent, patient, and determined ruler, skilled in both warfare and diplomacy, qualities that were essential for navigating the treacherous landscape of the post-Ankara era. Mehmed I died in 1421, possibly from a stroke or hunting accident, leaving behind a state that had been pulled back from the abyss. While the Ottoman Empire had not yet recovered the full extent of its power and prestige from before the Battle of Ankara, Mehmed I had successfully reunited its core territories, re-established central authority, and laid the foundations for a renewed period of growth and expansion under his son and successor, Murad II. His reign was a crucial interlude of recovery and consolidation that ensured the long-term survival and future greatness of the Ottoman Empire. The death of Mehmed I in 1421 brought his son, Murad II, to the Ottoman throne at a relatively young age, around 17. While his father had successfully reunited the empire and restored a semblance of order after the devastating interregnum, the Ottoman state was still vulnerable, and Murad II's early reign was immediately confronted by formidable challenges to his authority, testing his resolve and leadership. The Byzantine Emperor Manuel II Palaiologos, ever watchful for opportunities to weaken the Ottomans or at least secure more favorable terms, saw in the accession of a young sultan a chance to reignite internal Ottoman divisions. He released Mustafa Çelebi, known as Düzmise, the impostor. Mustafa, who still claimed to be a son of Bayezid I and had been interned on Lemnos under an agreement with Mehmed I. With Byzantine naval and financial support, Mustafa landed in Rumeli and quickly gathered a considerable following, including some influential Ottoman frontier lords. For a time, he controlled much of the Ottoman European territories, even striking his own coins and forcing Murad II's forces to retreat. However, Murad II, displaying a military prowess that belied his youth, confronted Mustafa's army at Ulubat, near Bursa in 1422. Mustafa's forces were defeated, many of his erstwhile supporters deserted him, and he was eventually captured and executed in Edirne, thus ending this serious threat to Murad II's rule. No sooner had this danger passed than another emerged, this time from Murad II's own younger brother Küçük Mustafa, Little Mustafa. Also encouraged by the Byzantines and supported by some Anatolian beyliks resentful of Ottoman dominance, particularly the Karamanids, Küçük Mustafa laid claim to the throne from Anatolia and even besieged Bursa. Murad II, having secured Rumeli, crossed back into Anatolia, isolated his rebellious brother from his allies, and after a brief siege of Anak, where Küçük Mustafa had taken refuge, captured and executed him in 1423. These successful suppressions of powerful pretenders, achieved through decisive military action and astute political maneuvering, consolidated Murad II's hold on power and sent a clear message about the restored strength of the central Ottoman government. As retribution for Byzantine support of these claimants, Murad II initiated a major siege of Constantinople in 1422. While the Ottomans possessed formidable land forces, their naval capabilities were still insufficient to effect a complete blockade, and the city's formidable Theodosian walls held firm. The siege was eventually lifted, partly due to the need to deal with Küçük Mustafa's revolt in Anatolia, but it resulted in a new treaty compelling the Byzantines to pay an increased tribute, further underscoring their declining status. With his throne secured, Murad II turned his attention to reasserting Ottoman authority in Anatolia and resuming expansionist policies. The Karamanids, based in Konya and Karaman, remained the most persistent Anatolian rivals, frequently challenging Ottoman hegemony and allying with other anti-Ottoman elements. Murad II undertook several campaigns against them throughout his reign, often forcing them into submission and territorial concessions, but rarely achieving a definitive subjugation. Other Western Anatolian beyliks that had regained autonomy after Ankara, such as Aydin and Menteş, were brought firmly back under direct Ottoman rule. The ruler of Jermian, a more steadfast ally, bequeathed his territories to Murad II upon his death, further consolidating Ottoman control over Western Anatolia through peaceful means. By the 1430s, much of Anatolia, with the notable exception of the still troublesome Karamanid heartland and some eastern principalities, was securely integrated into the Ottoman state. Simultaneously, Murad II renewed the Ottoman offensive in the Balkans, picking up where Bayezid I had left off before the disaster at Ankara. One of his most significant early Balkan conquests was the capture of Salonika, Thessaloniki, in 1430. This major Aegean port city had been sold by the Byzantines to Venice in 1423, as they were unable to defend it themselves. After a nearly 3-year siege, Ottoman forces stormed Salonika, a significant blow to Venetian commercial and maritime interests in the region, and a clear demonstration of growing Ottoman power in the Aegean. Throughout the 1430s, Ottoman armies pushed deeper into Serbia, Albania, and Wallachia, and engaged in increasingly frequent and intense conflicts with the Kingdom of Hungary, which viewed itself as the primary bulwark of Christendom against Ottoman expansion. Figures such as George Branković, the despot of Serbia, who skillfully navigated a perilous path between Ottoman suzerainty and Hungarian alliances, and particularly John Hunyadi, János Hunyadi, voivode of Transylvania and later regent governor of Hungary, emerged as formidable adversaries. Hunyadi, a brilliant military commander, would become one of the Ottomans' most persistent and successful opponents for decades. Ottoman expansion into Albania also ignited a long-lasting resistance movement led by Gjergj Kastrioti, known as Skanderbeg, who had formerly served in the Ottoman army but rebelled in 1443, becoming a legendary figure of Albanian independence. The growing Ottoman pressure in the Balkans, coupled with Hunyadi's early successes in repelling Ottoman raids, led to renewed calls in Europe for a crusade. Pope Eugene IV actively promoted an alliance against the Ottomans. This materialized in the early 1440s, with a coalition largely comprising Hungarian, Polish, Wallachian, and German crusaders, along with Serbian forces. John Hunyadi spearheaded what became known as the Long Campaign in the Ottoman winter of 1443 to 1444. He led the Crusader army deep into Ottoman Balkan territory, winning several victories, including at Niš and Zlatica, and forcing Murad II's armies into retreat. These successes, though not decisive in destroying Ottoman power, were significant enough to compel Murad II to negotiate. In the summer of 1444, the Peace of Szeged, or Edirne as versions were ratified in both cities, was concluded. This 10-year truce involved significant Ottoman concessions, the restoration of Serbia as a buffer state under George Branković, and the recognition of Wallachian autonomy under Hungarian suzerainty. It appeared to be a major diplomatic victory for the Christian coalition. Following the conclusion of this seemingly unfavorable treaty and reportedly weary of war and grieving the recent death of his favorite son, Sezade Alaeddin, Murad II made a surprising decision. In August 1444, he abdicated the Ottoman throne in favor of his 12-year-old son, Mehmed II. Murad II retired to a life of contemplation and religious devotion in Manisa, in western Anatolia. This abdication, however, proved premature and ill-timed. The presence of a child sultan on the Ottoman throne was perceived as a sign of weakness by the Christian powers. Encouraged by Cardinal Julian Cesarini, who argued that oaths made to an infidel were not binding, King Ladislaus of Poland and Hungary, also Ladislaus III of Varna, and John Hunyadi renounced the Peace of Szeged almost immediately after its ratification and launched a new offensive, hoping to exploit the situation and drive the Ottomans from Europe once and for all. The Crusader army marched through Bulgaria towards the Black Sea port of Varna, creating an immediate and grave crisis for the Ottoman Empire, now nominally led by an inexperienced boy. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, and the decision of Murad II to step away from power would soon be tested. The abdication of Sultan Murad II in 1444 in favor of his 12-year-old son Mehmed II and his subsequent retirement to Manisa created an immediate power vacuum that the Christian coalition, led by King Ladislaus of Poland and Hungary and the formidable John Hunyadi, sought to exploit. Disregarding the recently signed Peace of Szeged, the Crusader army advanced through Bulgaria, aiming for the Black Sea port of Varna, confident that a child ruler could not effectively oppose them. The situation within the Ottoman Empire became dire. Panic spread in Edirne, and immense pressure was brought to bear on Murad II to resume command. According to a famous, though possibly apocryphal account, the young Mehmed II himself dispatched a message to his father stating, "If you are the Sultan, come and lead your armies. If I am the Sultan, I hereby order you to come and lead my armies." Regardless of the exact entreaty, Murad II, recognizing the grave danger to the empire, relinquished his contemplative retirement and hastened back to the capital, once again taking command of the Ottoman forces. The two armies met at the Battle of Varna on November 10, 1444. The Crusader forces, though perhaps outnumbered, were confident after their successes in the Long Campaign. The battle was hard fought and remained in the balance for several hours. Ottoman discipline, particularly that of the Janissary Corps forming the core of their defense, possibly arranged in a wagon laager or taborchengi formation, proved crucial. A pivotal moment occurred when King Ladislaus, in a rash attempt to capture Murad II himself or break the Ottoman center, led a desperate cavalry charge deep into the Janissary lines. The charge was repulsed, Ladislaus was unhorsed and killed, and his head was reportedly displayed on a spear, shattering Crusader morale. John Hunyadi managed to rally some remnants and escape, but the battle was a decisive Ottoman victory. The consequences of Varna were far-reaching. The crusading coalition was shattered, Ottoman dominance in the Balkans was forcefully reasserted, and future large-scale European land crusades against the Ottomans became far less frequent and formidable. Although Murad II had led the army to victory at Varna, Mehmed II formally remained sultan for a short period, with his father acting as the de facto ruler. However, this arrangement proved unstable. The young sultan, influenced by ambitious tutors who encouraged a more aggressive policy, particularly regarding Constantinople, clashed with established figures like the powerful Grand Vizier Kandarli Halil Pasha, who favored a more cautious approach. Janissary unrest, possibly fueled by dissatisfaction with the young sultan's administration or by factions loyal to Murad II, also contributed to the decision for Murad II to officially resume the throne in 1446, sending Mehmed II back to Manisa, this time as governor, to gain more experience. Murad II's second reign, 1446 to 1451, was marked by continued military campaigns to consolidate Ottoman power. In the Balkans, the Albanian chieftain Gjergj Kastrioti, known as Skanderbeg, continued to wage a highly effective guerrilla war from his mountain strongholds, proving a persistent thorn in the Ottoman side. Murad II led several expeditions into Albania, capturing some fortresses but failing to decisively crush the rebellion, which would outlast his reign. John Hunyadi, now regent governor of Hungary, was determined to avenge the defeat at Varna. He assembled another army and in 1448 marched south, seeking to link up with Skanderbeg. Murad II intercepted Hunyadi's forces at the Second Battle of Kosovo. Over 3 days of intense fighting, October 17 to 20, 1448, the Ottomans once again achieved a crushing victory. Hunyadi again escaped, but his Balkan coalition was broken. This second triumph at Kosovo firmly cemented Ottoman control over the Central Balkans for the foreseeable future, and largely deterred Hungary from launching major offensive campaigns south of the Danube for many years. Beyond warfare, Murad II was also a significant patron of arts, literature, and architecture. His reign saw the construction of notable buildings such as the Muradiye complex in Bursa, which included a mosque, madrasa, and his own tomb, and the elegant Usi Serafeli Mosque in Edirne, renowned for its distinctive minarets and spacious interior dome. He cultivated a court that attracted poets and scholars, and he himself was known for his piety and interest in Sufism. Despite his military successes, historical accounts often portray him as a ruler who longed for peace and a contemplative life, a characteristic underscored by his earlier abdication. Sultan Murad II died in Edirne in February 1451. His death paved the way for the second, and this time permanent, accession of his son Mehmed II, then 19 years old. The transition was smooth, Mehmed had matured, and his determination to achieve his ultimate ambition was now unshakable. That ambition, nurtured since his first brief taste of power, was the conquest of Constantinople, the ancient capital of the Roman and Byzantine empires, the city that had defied Muslim armies for centuries. Almost immediately upon assuming the throne, Mehmed II began meticulous preparations for this monumental undertaking. He moved quickly to consolidate his authority, ensuring the loyalty of the Janissaries and key officials, and neutralizing any potential internal rivals. While Kandarli Halil Pasha, still Grand Vizier, remained cautious about the enterprise, Mehmed II was not to be deterred. His diplomatic preparations were equally astute. He renewed peace treaties with Venice and Hungary to minimize the risk of intervention during his planned siege, although John Hunyadi remained a potential threat. His most visible and strategically crucial military preparation began in the spring of 1452 with the construction of a massive fortress on the European side of the Bosphorus, directly opposite Anadolu Hisari, which had been built by his great-grandfather Bayezid I. This new fortress, initially called Bogaz Kasin, Straight Cutter or Throat Cutter, and later known as Rumeli Hisari, was completed in a remarkably short period of about 4 months. Its purpose was clear: to gain absolute control over the Bosphorus, preventing any ships from reaching Constantinople from the Black Sea with aid or supplies. Furthermore, Mehmed II invested heavily in the development of new siege weaponry, particularly massive bronze cannons. A Hungarian engineer named Orban, who had initially offered his services to the Byzantines, was employed by Mehmed to cast cannons of unprecedented size, capable of battering down the legendary Theodosian walls. Meanwhile, in Constantinople, Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last Byzantine emperor, watched these preparations with growing dread. He made desperate appeals to Western Europe for military assistance, offering the highly contentious union of the Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches, which had been formally agreed upon at the Council of Florence years earlier, but fiercely resisted by the Byzantine clergy and populace. The union was officially proclaimed in the Hagia Sophia in December 1452, but it provoked widespread resentment among the Orthodox faithful and did little to secure substantial military aid from the West. A small number of Genoese and Venetian volunteers arrived, but the great powers of Europe were largely preoccupied with their own affairs or unwilling to commit significant forces. The stage was being set for a final, epic confrontation. The Ottoman Sultan, young, brilliant, and utterly determined, had assembled his forces and technology, ready to lay siege to the city that was the symbol of a dying empire and the key to his own imperial dreams. By the spring of 1453, Sultan Mehmed II, now widely recognized by his soon-to-be-earned epithet, Fatih, the Conqueror, had meticulously assembled his forces and completed his strategic preparations for the ultimate prize, Constantinople. The ancient city, capital of the Byzantine Empire for over 11 centuries, stood as a potent symbol of Christian Roman heritage and a formidable bastion, having repelled numerous sieges throughout its long history. For Mehmed II, its capture was not merely a strategic imperative to unify his European and Anatolian domains and eliminate a potential Christian foothold within his empire. It was a deeply held ambition, a fulfillment of Islamic prophecies, and the definitive act that would cement his legacy and elevate the Ottoman state to undisputed imperial status. In early April 1453, the vast Ottoman army, estimated by some contemporary sources to be between 80,000 and 200,000 men, comprising elite janissaries, regular Azap infantry, Sipahi cavalry, formidable siege engineers, and numerous irregular Bashi bazooks, encamped before the land walls of Constantinople. The Ottoman fleet, said to number over 100 vessels, blockaded the city from the Sea of Marmara, aiming to cut off all seaborne relief. Facing this immense host was Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last Byzantine ruler, who commanded a tragically outnumbered force. Estimates of the defenders vary, but they likely numbered no more than 7,000 to 10,000 men, including Byzantine soldiers, armed citizens, and a crucial contingent of about 700 well-armed Genoese professional soldiers, led by the skilled condottiero Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, whose expertise in siege warfare would prove invaluable. The city's primary defense lay in its legendary Theodosian walls, a triple line of fortifications that stretched for nearly 7 kilometers and had withstood countless assaults for a millennium. Additionally, a massive iron chain was stretched across the mouth of the Golden Horn, the city's natural harbor on its northern flank, to prevent the Ottoman fleet from entering. The siege formally began on April 6, 1453, with a demand for surrender, which Constantine XI resolutely refused, vowing to defend his city to the death. The Ottoman response was a relentless artillery bombardment, spearheaded by the enormous bronze cannons designed by the Hungarian engineer Orban and others. These behemoths, including the famed basilic cannon, hurled massive stone balls against the ancient walls, causing significant damage, particularly to the weaker sections like the St. Romanus Gate in the Lycus Valley. The psychological impact of these previously unseen superweapons was immense, though the defenders worked tirelessly day and night to repair the breaches under Giustiniani's expert direction. Early Ottoman attempts to storm the damaged sections of the walls were met with fierce and desperate resistance, resulting in heavy Ottoman casualties. A significant morale boost for the besieged occurred on April 20th, when a squadron of 4 Genoese ships, accompanied by a Byzantine vessel laden with vital supplies and reinforcements, skillfully fought their way through the Ottoman naval blockade in the Sea of Marmara and, under favorable winds, successfully entered the Golden Horn. This success, achieved in full view of both armies, was a considerable embarrassment for Mehmed II and demonstrated the limitations of his fleet against experienced Christian mariners. Determined to neutralize the Golden Horn and stretch the city's limited defenders along another front, Mehmed II conceived and executed one of the most audacious and brilliant tactical maneuvers in siege warfare history. Around April 22nd, he ordered his lighter ships to be transported overland from the Bosphorus across the Genoese trading quarter of Pera, Galata, and into the Golden Horn, bypassing the protective chain entirely. Thousands of workers, using greased logs and rollers, reportedly moved between 70 and 80 vessels over the hilly terrain in a single night. This astonishing feat allowed the Ottomans to establish a naval presence within the Golden Horn, forcing the defenders to divert precious manpower and resources to guard the harbor walls, which were less formidable than the land fortifications. Throughout late April and May, the siege ground on relentlessly. Ottoman artillery continued its thunderous bombardment, gradually crumbling sections of the outer walls. Mining and countermining operations became a deadly subterranean battle as Ottoman engineers attempted to dig tunnels beneath the fortifications, only to be met by Byzantine counterminers, often led by the Scotsman John Grant. Mehmed II made several offers of surrender, promising Constantine XI his life and rule over a principality elsewhere, but the emperor, supported by his commanders, repeatedly refused to abandon his people and his imperial heritage. The strain on the defenders was immense. They were exhausted, outnumbered, and dwindling in number due to casualties and attrition, while Ottoman forces were constantly reinforced. Giustiniani Longo remained the linchpin of the defense, his courage and expertise inspiring the defenders. By late May, Mehmed II, aware that the siege could not continue indefinitely and perhaps concerned about potential relief efforts from Hungary or Italy, decided to launch an all-out, massive assault. After a day of rest and religious exhortations, promising his troops the customary 3 days of plunder, the final offensive began in the pre-dawn hours of May 29, 1453. The attack was launched in waves. First, the irregular Bashi bazooks were sent forward to absorb the initial shock and tire the defenders. They were followed by Anatolian regular troops, who pressed the attack with greater discipline. Finally, after hours of continuous fighting, with the defenders pushed to the brink of exhaustion, Mehmed unleashed his elite janissaries. In the fierce fighting near the St. Romanus Gate, Giovanni Giustiniani Longo was severely wounded, possibly by an arrow or shrapnel. His decision to withdraw from the front line to seek medical attention had a devastating impact on the morale of the remaining defenders. Though accounts vary, soon after, a section of the wall was breached, or a small, poorly defended postern gate known as the Kirka Porta was either left unsecured or forced open, allowing Ottoman troops to pour into the city. Constantine XI, realizing the end had come, reportedly cast off his imperial regalia and plunged into the thick of the fighting with his last remaining soldiers, perishing heroically. With the emperor dead and the walls breached in multiple locations, organized resistance collapsed. Ottoman soldiers surged through the city, and the dreaded 3 days of pillage began. Civilians sought refuge in churches, particularly the Hagia Sophia, hoping for divine intervention that never came. On the afternoon of May 29th, Sultan Mehmed II made his triumphal entry into the conquered city. Riding to the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral of Eastern Christendom, he dismounted, reportedly sprinkled dust on his turban as a sign of humility before God, and ordered the building to be converted into a mosque. The first Friday prayer was held there within days, symbolizing the city's transformation. Mehmed II, true to his word, largely halted the plunder after the agreed-upon period and began the process of restoring order and initiating the city's repopulation. He declared Constantinople, now to be increasingly known as Constantiniye in official Ottoman use, and Istanbul in common parlance, the new capital of his empire. The fall of Constantinople was an event of monumental historical significance. It marked the definitive end of the Byzantine Empire, the last direct remnant of the Roman Empire. For the Ottoman Empire, it was the realization of a centuries-old dream, providing it with a magnificent imperial capital that straddled Europe and Asia and cementing its status as a dominant world power. For Mehmed II, it earned him the enduring title Fatih, the Conqueror, and secured his place as one of the most formidable figures in Ottoman and world history. The conquest of Constantinople in 1453 was not an end but a monumental beginning for Sultan Mehmed II, thereafter known as Fatih Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror. With the ancient city, now to be the new Ottoman capital of Istanbul, firmly in his grasp, Mehmed embarked on a series of ambitious projects to transform it into a worthy center of his rapidly expanding empire, and to further consolidate Ottoman power across southeastern Europe, Anatolia, and the Black Sea region. His immediate priority was the repopulation and revitalization of Istanbul, which had suffered from depopulation even before the siege and further devastation during the sack. Mehmed initiated policies to encourage resettlement, drawing inhabitants from across his diverse domains, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, offering them incentives such as tax breaks and properties. He also forcibly relocated communities, a practice known as surgan, to ensure a vibrant, cosmopolitan demographic mix essential for the capital's economic and social life. He granted amens, guarantees of safety and rights, to many of the remaining Byzantine citizens, and even facilitated the return of some who had fled. Significant construction projects commenced under his patronage. Foundations were laid for the Grand Bazaar, Kapılarsi, destined to become one of the world's premier commercial centers. The majestic Fatih Mosque complex, built on the site of the dilapidated Church of the Holy Apostles, the traditional burial place of Byzantine emperors, was a symbol of this new imperial Islamic identity, comprising not only a mosque but also madrasas, a hospital, a library, and other public amenities. Construction also began on the Topkapi Palace, Saray-i Chedidi Amire, the new imperial palace, which would serve as the primary residence of the Ottoman sultans and the administrative heart of the empire for centuries. To ensure the smooth governance of the Christian populace and to integrate them into the Ottoman system, Mehmed II appointed Gennadios Skolarios as the new Greek Orthodox Patriarch, granting him civil authority over the Orthodox community. Similar arrangements were made for the Armenian Patriarchate and the chief rabbi of the Jewish community, laying the foundational principles of what would later evolve into the more formalized millet system, where recognized religious minorities governed their own communal affairs under Ottoman oversight. A significant political move early in this period was the execution of the long-serving Grand Vizier Kandarli Halil Pasha in late 1453. This act, possibly fueled by Mehmed's suspicion of Kandarli's lack of enthusiasm for the siege or his immense influence derived from old Turkish aristocratic ties, signaled a decisive shift towards greater sultanic autocracy and an increasing reliance on officials drawn from the Dev-Surme system, the levy of Christian boys for state service, who were beholden solely to the Sultan. With Istanbul's transformation underway, Mehmed II resumed his relentless military campaigns. In Europe, he aimed to eliminate the last vestiges of Byzantine rule and solidify Ottoman control over the Balkans. The Despotate of Morea in the Peloponnese, ruled by brothers of the last Byzantine emperor, was conquered between 1458 and 1460. Serbia, which had long been a vassal, was fully annexed, with its capital Smederevo falling in 1459, although the strategic fortress of Belgrade, Nandorfa-Hirvar, on the Danube remained a stumbling block. In 1456, Mehmed II personally led a major siege against Belgrade, which was heroically defended by Hungarian forces under John Hunyadi. The Ottomans suffered a significant defeat, their first major setback under Mehmed, and the Sultan himself was wounded. This victory halted Ottoman advances into Hungary for several decades. Further south, Bosnia was conquered and incorporated into the empire as a province in 1463. Wallachia, under the fearsome Vlad III the Impaler, Kazikli Voivoda, proved a troublesome vassal, leading to several Ottoman punitive expeditions to assert suzerainty. The struggle against Albanian resistance, led by the indomitable Skanderbeg, continued until Skanderbeg's death in 1468, after which Ottoman forces gradually subdued the region, culminating in the hard-won capture of Shkodër from Venetian control in 1479, after a prolonged and difficult siege, Indeed, Venice, with its extensive maritime and colonial interests in the eastern Mediterranean, became a major rival. A lengthy Ottoman-Venetian War, 1463 to 1479, saw intense fighting for control of Aegean islands and coastal strongholds in Morea and Albania. A key Ottoman success was the capture of the strategically important Venetian colony of Negroponte, Euboea, in 1470. The eventual peace treaty largely confirmed Ottoman territorial gains. In Anatolia and the Black Sea region, Mehmed II was equally active. The Greek Empire of Trebizond, the last independent Byzantine successor state, located on the southeastern coast of the Black Sea, was conquered in 1461. The Karamanids, the Ottomans' most persistent Turkoman rivals in Anatolia, were finally and completely subjugated by 1474, their territories fully annexed. A major challenge emerged from Uzun Hasan, the powerful ruler of the Akoyunlu, White Sheep Turkomans, in eastern Anatolia and Persia, who formed alliances with Venice and other European powers. At the pivotal Battle of Beylik in 1473, Mehmed II's forces, employing superior artillery and disciplined janissary firepower, inflicted a decisive defeat upon Uzun Hasan's formidable cavalry-based army. This victory secured Ottoman dominance over eastern Anatolia and neutralized a significant threat. In 1475, an Ottoman naval expedition targeted the Genoese trading colonies in the Crimea. Kaffa and other Genoese possessions were captured, and the Crimean Khanate, under the Giray dynasty, became a vassal state of the Ottoman Empire. This move effectively transformed the Black Sea into an Ottoman lake for centuries, controlling crucial trade routes. Beyond his military conquests, Mehmed II was a significant legislator and a centralizer of state power. He commissioned the compilation of the Kanun-name Ali Osman, the law code of the House of Osman, a secular legal code that complemented Islamic Sharia law. This Kanun-name codified existing practices and introduced new regulations concerning state organization, court protocol, criminal justice, land tenure, including the Timar system, and taxation. Notably, it formalized the practice of fratricide upon a new sultan's accession, deeming it permissible for the sake of the order of the world, Nizam-i-Alam, to prevent succession struggles that could destabilize the empire. This further concentrated power in the hands of the reigning sultan. Mehmed also cultivated a sophisticated court, displaying an interest in Islamic scholarship, poetry, and history, as well as Western arts and sciences. He invited Italian artists like Gentile Bellini to his court, who famously painted his portrait, and he amassed a significant library containing works in multiple languages. In the spring of 1481, Fatih Sultan Mehmed was preparing for a new major military campaign. The intended target remains a subject of historical debate. Some suggest Rhodes, still held by the Knights of St. John. Others propose a further push into southern Italy. Ottoman forces had briefly captured Otranto in 1480, while some even speculate an audacious march towards Rome itself. However, while on campaign near Gebze, east of Istanbul, the 49-year-old Sultan suddenly fell ill and died on May 3, 1481. Rumors of poisoning, possibly instigated by his eldest son Bayezid or by Venetian agents, have persisted, though definitive proof is lacking. Mehmed the Conqueror left behind a legacy of monumental achievement, a vastly expanded empire with a thriving new capital, a more centralized administration, a formidable military, and a reputation as one of history's greatest conquerors and statesmen. His reign had decisively shaped the Ottoman Empire into a dominant global power. The sudden death of Fatih Sultan Mehmed in 1481 while on campaign immediately threw the question of succession into sharp relief, a recurring point of tension in Ottoman history despite his earlier codification of fratricide. Two of his sons emerged as primary contenders. The elder, Bayezid, then governor of Amasya, known for his contemplative nature and piety, and the younger, Cem Sultan, governor of Karaman in Konya, who was perceived to be more in the ambitious and martial mold of his father. Cem was reportedly favored by some of Fatih's high officials, including the Grand Vizier Karamani Mehmed Pasha. However, the Janissaries in Istanbul, a powerful political force, favored Bayezid. Upon news of Mehmed's death, they mutinied, killed the Grand Vizier, and secured the capital for Bayezid, who hastened from Amasya, and was acclaimed Sultan Bayezid II in May 1481. Sem Sultan, however, refused to accept this outcome. Gathering support in Anatolia, he captured Bursa and declared himself Sultan, even proposing a division of the empire to Bayezid, Anatolia for himself and Rumeli for Bayezid. This proposal was anathema to the Ottoman principle of indivisible sovereignty. Bayezid II decisively rejected it and marched against his brother. In June 1481, Bayezid's forces defeated Shem's army at the Battle of Yenisehir. Shem was forced to flee, first finding refuge in Mamluk Egypt. After a failed attempt to rally further support in Anatolia, Shem made the fateful decision in 1482 to seek asylum with the Knights of St. John on the island of Rhodes, under their Grand Master Pierre d'Aubusson. This marked the beginning of the Kem Sultan affair, a long and complex diplomatic episode that would cast a shadow over much of Bayezid II's reign. The Knights, realizing the value of their royal captive, essentially held Shem hostage, using him as a bargaining chip with Bayezid II, who agreed to pay a substantial annual subsidy to ensure his brother remained in captivity and was not used to instigate another civil war. Sem's captivity turned him into an international pawn. He was later transferred from Rhodes to France, and eventually to the custody of the Pope in Rome, first under Pope Innocent VIII, and then Pope Alexander VI. Various European powers, including France, Hungary, and the Kingdom of Naples, contemplated using Sem as a figurehead for a potential crusade against the Ottoman Empire, or as a means to destabilize Bayezid's rule. Consequently, Bayezid II's foreign policy was often characterized by caution and a reluctance to engage in major European campaigns that might provoke Sem's release. The Sem problem effectively constrained Ottoman expansionist ambitions in Europe for over a decade. Finally, in 1495, Kem Sultan died in Naples, possibly due to illness or, as rumored, poisoning. His death came as an immense relief to Bayezid II, freeing him from a major political anxiety and removing a significant impediment to a more assertive foreign policy. Bayezid II's reign, 1481 to 1512, is often contrasted sharply with that of his father. Where Mehmed II was a relentless conqueror and a radical centralizer, Bayezid II, often styled Veli the Saint or Adli the Just, due to his piety and interest in mysticism, favored internal consolidation, administrative stability, and religious patronage. He reversed some of his father's more controversial fiscal policies, such as the large-scale conversion of religious endowment lands, Evkaf, into state lands, Miri. Bayezid returned many of these properties to their original purposes or owners, a move that earned him the support of the ulema, religious scholars, and some established families, but was also seen by some as weakening the state's fiscal base and the Timar system. Despite his more pacific inclinations, Bayezid II's reign was not devoid of military activity, though it was often aimed at consolidation, defense, or securing specific strategic objectives rather than large-scale conquest. A significant conflict was the Ottoman-Mamluk War, 1485 to 1491. Fought over disputed territories in Cilicia, the Cukurova region, and influence over buffer principalities like the Dulkadirids. This protracted and costly war, involving several major but largely indecisive campaigns, ended with a return to the status quo ante bellum, highlighting the formidable military strength of the Mamluk Sultanate. In the Balkans, Ottoman forces continued to conduct raids into Hungarian, Croatian, and Styrian territories, and solidified control over Bosnia and Herzegovina. A notable achievement was the capture in 1484 of the strategic Black Sea ports of Kilia, at the mouth of the Danube, and Ackerman, Cetatea Alba, at the mouth of the Dniester, from Moldavian control. This secured Ottoman dominance over the western Black Sea littoral and vital trade routes. Bayezid II also oversaw a modest expansion of the Ottoman fleet. This led to a significant war with Venice, 1499 to 1503, during which the Ottoman navy, with commanders like Kemal Reis, demonstrated growing capability. The Ottomans captured key Venetian strongholds in Greece and Albania, including Modon, Coron, Lepanto, Navpaktos, and Durazzo Durrës. The peace treaty confirmed these important Ottoman gains and marked a shift in naval power in the eastern Mediterranean. Internally, Bayezid II was a notable patron of religious institutions and Sufi orders. He commissioned the construction of impressive mosque complexes, bearing his name in Istanbul, Edirne, and Amasya, each serving as centers of religious learning and charity. His reign, however, also faced significant challenges. In September 1509, Istanbul was struck by a devastating earthquake, referred to by contemporaries as the Kıyamet-i Sugra, the Little Apocalypse, which caused widespread destruction and loss of life. Bayezid initiated extensive rebuilding efforts. A far more serious and politically destabilizing threat emerged from the east, with the rise of Shah Ismail I, founder of the Safavid dynasty in Persia around the turn of the century. Shah Ismail championed a militant form of Shia Islam and cultivated a fervent following among Turkoman tribes in both Persia and eastern Anatolia, known as the Kizilbash, redheads, due to their distinctive headgear. Safavid propaganda and Kizilbash missionary activity fueled pro-Shia unrest within Ottoman Anatolia, culminating in the large-scale Sakulu, slave of the Shah rebellion in 1511. This rebellion, though eventually suppressed with considerable difficulty, exposed the vulnerability of Ottoman control in the region and the potency of the Safavid challenge. Bayezid II's, cautious and perceived by some as inadequate, response to the rising Safavid threat and the Sakulu uprising created widespread dissatisfaction among the Ottoman military and more hawkish elements at court. This dissatisfaction directly fueled the succession struggles that began to overshadow the final years of Bayezid II's reign. Of his surviving sons, Sezade Ahmed was the heir apparent by designation, while Sezade Korkut was a scholarly figure. The youngest, Sezade Selim, governor of Trabzon, was by far the most aggressive and ambitious. Deeply concerned by the Safavid threat and impatient with his father's policies, Selim began to act independently, even leading unauthorized military expeditions. In 1511, Selim marched towards Edirne, demanding a governorship in Rumeli to better combat potential threats and position himself for the succession. He was defeated by Bayezid's forces, but managed to escape to Crimea. However, his aggressive stance and perceived martial prowess had won him considerable support among the Janissaries, who increasingly saw him as the leader best equipped to handle the empire's challenges. In April 1512, under intense pressure from the Janissaries, who openly declared their support for Selim, Bayezid II was forced to abdicate the throne in favor of his youngest son. Just over a month later, in May 1512, Bayezid II died near Demotica while en route to his intended place of retirement. His reign, often seen as an interlude between two great conquerors, was nevertheless a crucial period of consolidation and saw the emergence of formidable new external and internal challenges that his successor, Selim I, would confront with ruthless determination. The accession of Selim I in April 1512, following the forced abdication of his father Bayezid II, marked a dramatic shift in Ottoman policy and temperament. Known by the epithet Yavuz, variously translated as the stern, the grim, or the resolute, Selim was a ruler of fierce ambition, unyielding determination, and renowned military prowess, a stark contrast to his more contemplative father. His short reign, lasting only 8 years, 1512 to 1520, would prove to be one of the most transformative in Ottoman history, fundamentally reorienting the empire's geopolitical focus and vastly expanding its territories and influence, particularly in the Islamic heartlands. Selim's first priority upon assuming the throne was the ruthless consolidation of his power, ensuring that no rival claimants could challenge his rule, a lesson learned from the disruptive Kem-Sultan affair during his father's reign. He swiftly moved against his surviving brothers, Seyzade Ahmed and Seyzade Korkut. Ahmed, who had initially contested the succession, was defeated in battle, captured, and executed in 1513. Korkut, who had initially submitted, was later also executed on suspicion of treason. Selim further ordered the execution of his nephews, effectively eliminating all potential dynastic rivals and solidifying the grim Ottoman practice of fratricide for the sake of imperial stability. With his domestic position secured through these brutal measures, Selim turned his formidable energies outward. His primary foreign policy obsession was the perceived existential threat posed by the Safavid Empire in Persia under Shah Ismail I. The Safavids championed Twelver Shia Islam, which Selim, a staunch Sunni, viewed as a dangerous heresy that threatened Ottoman orthodoxy and undermined Ottoman authority among the Turkoman populations of eastern Anatolia, many of whom were sympathetic to the Safavid Qizilbash movement. Before launching a direct assault on Persia, Selim initiated a brutal persecution of suspected Qizilbash supporters within Anatolia, with some sources claiming tens of thousands were killed or imprisoned. This was intended to secure his rear and eliminate any potential fifth column. In the summer of 1514, Selim led a massive Ottoman army eastward on a grueling campaign into Persia. Despite logistical challenges and growing discontent among his janissaries due to the arduous march and scorched earth tactics employed by the Safavids, Selim pressed on. The decisive confrontation occurred at the Battle of Calderon, on August 23, 1514. The Ottoman army, with its superior numbers and, crucially, its formidable corps of janissaries, equipped with muskets and supported by a powerful artillery train, clashed with the predominantly cavalry-based Safavid forces. Shah Ismail, a charismatic leader who had previously enjoyed an aura of invincibility, fought bravely, but his Qizilbash cavalry charges were decimated by Ottoman firepower. Shah Ismail himself was wounded and forced to flee, and his army was routed. Selim briefly occupied the Safavid capital, Tabriz, though he was unable to hold it permanently due to logistical constraints and the onset of winter. The Battle of Calderon was a resounding Ottoman victory. It shattered Shah Ismail's prestige, secured Ottoman control over much of eastern Anatolia, including key cities like Diyarbakir and Mardin, and parts of Kurdistan, and effectively contained the direct Safavid military threat to the Ottoman heartland for a considerable period, though the ideological and political rivalry would persist for centuries. Having neutralized the immediate Safavid danger, Selim I then turned his attention southward towards the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, which controlled Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and the Hejaz, including the Islamic holy cities of Mecca and Medina. The Mamluks had previously given refuge to Selim's brother Ahmed, maintained a rivalry with the Ottomans over influence in buffer states like the Dulkadir Beylik, and were perceived by Selim as being potentially unreliable or even colluding with the Safavids. Furthermore, control over the Mamluk territories offered immense strategic and economic advantages, including mastery over crucial east-west trade routes and the vast agricultural wealth of Egypt. In 1515, Selim moved against the Dulkadir Beylik, a Turkoman principality on the Mamluk frontier, defeating its ruler and annexing its territory, thus securing a strategic springboard for an invasion of Syria. In 1516, Selim launched his campaign against the Mamluks. The first major encounter was the Battle of Marj Dabik, north of Aleppo, on August 24, 1516. Once again, Ottoman tactical discipline and superior gunpowder weaponry proved decisive against the Mamluks' renowned but increasingly outdated cavalry-centric military traditions. The elderly Mamluk Sultan Consul al-Ghawri was killed in the fighting. The victory opened the way for the Ottoman conquest of Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine. The new Mamluk Sultan Tuman Bey II rallied his remaining forces for a final defense of Egypt. The Ottomans advanced across the Sinai Peninsula and met the Mamluks at the Battle of Ridania outside Cairo on January 22, 1517. Despite fierce Mamluk resistance, including their first significant use of cannons, the Ottomans again triumphed. Cairo fell shortly thereafter, and Tuman Bey II, after a period of guerrilla resistance, was captured and executed, bringing an end to over 2.5 centuries of Mamluk rule. The conquest of the Mamluk Sultanate was an achievement of monumental proportions. It nearly doubled the size of the Ottoman Empire, adding vast, populous, and wealthy provinces. Most significantly, it brought the holy cities of Mecca and Medina under Ottoman protection, a development of immense religious and political prestige. Selim adopted the title Khadim al-Haramain al-Sharifain, servitor of the two holy sanctuaries, reinforcing the Ottoman Sultan's claim to preeminence within the Sunni Islamic world. It is also during this period that the last Abbasid Caliph in Cairo, al-Mutawakkil III, is said to have formally transferred the caliphal title and its insignia, such as the Prophet's sword and mantle, to Selim I. While the full historical weight and immediate assertion of the Ottoman Caliphate are debated by scholars, with many suggesting its more forceful articulation came later, this event undoubtedly laid the groundwork for future Ottoman claims to universal Islamic leadership. Economically, the conquest gave the Ottomans control over the lucrative Red Sea trade routes and the immense revenues generated by Egypt. Selim I also paid attention to naval affairs, Understanding the importance of sea power, he initiated a significant naval building program and appointed the famed admiral and cartographer Piri to a high command, tasking him with preparing plans for future expeditions. It is believed Selim was planning a major campaign against Rhodes, still held by the Knights of St. John, before his death. Selim's character was a complex tapestry of ruthlessness, piety, administrative acumen, and intellectual curiosity. He was an accomplished poet, writing under the pen name Mahlas Salimi. His reign, though brief, was one of the most consequential in Ottoman history. He fundamentally reshaped the empire, transforming it from a primarily Balkan and Anatolian power into the dominant force in the Middle East and the leading state in the Sunni Islamic world. He also filled the imperial treasury, providing a sound financial basis for the ambitious undertakings of his successor. In September 1520, while preparing for another military campaign, Sultan Selim I died at the age of about 50, reportedly from a skin infection known as serpents, possibly anthrax or a severe carbuncle, or perhaps skin cancer. His death occurred relatively suddenly, but the succession of his only son, Suleiman, was smooth and uncontested, a testament to Selim's earlier brutal efficiency in eliminating rivals. Selim left an empire vastly aggrandized, confident, and poised on the brink of what many would consider its golden age. The death of Selim I in September 1520 brought his only son, Suleiman I, to the Ottoman throne. At 26 years old, Suleiman inherited a vast, wealthy, and powerful empire, its treasury full from his father's conquests and its military formidable. His accession was smooth and uncontested, a rare occurrence in Ottoman history, largely due to Selim's earlier ruthless elimination of all other potential dynastic rivals. Suleiman, known in the West as the Magnificent for the splendor of his court and the grandeur of his military and architectural achievements, and in the East as Kanuni, the lawgiver, for his profound work in reorganizing Ottoman law, was a well-educated and cultured prince. He was initially perceived as a gentler figure than his grim father, and indeed some of his early acts included gestures of clemency and justice, such as releasing some prisoners and compensating merchants whose goods had been confiscated by Selim. However, he also possessed a steely determination and a profound sense of imperial destiny, which would soon become evident as he embarked on a reign that would mark the zenith of Ottoman power and prestige. One of his closest companions and most influential advisors in the early part of his reign was Pargali Ibrahim Pasha, a man of Greek Christian origin who had entered Suleiman's service as a page and rose rapidly through the ranks due to his intelligence and loyalty, eventually becoming Grand Vizier and wielding immense authority. Suleiman quickly demonstrated that he intended to be an active warrior sultan in the mold of his ancestors. His early military campaigns were directed towards Europe, where Ottoman power still faced significant challenges. In 1521, he achieved a major strategic victory that had eluded even Mehmed the Conqueror, the capture of Belgrade, Nandor-Fehérvár. This formidable fortress at the confluence of the Danube and Sava rivers was the key to Hungary and further advances into Central Europe. Its fall sent shockwaves across Christendom and opened the Danubian plain to Ottoman forces. The following year, in 1522, Suleiman turned his attention to another long-standing objective, the island of Rhodes, stronghold of the Knights of St. John. These crusading knights had long been a thorn in the side of Ottoman maritime interests, launching raids on Ottoman shipping and coastal towns. After a grueling 6-month siege, the knights were forced to surrender. Suleiman, in a display of calculated magnanimity that also served his strategic interests by avoiding a protracted fight to the death, allowed the surviving knights to depart with their arms and possessions. The conquest of Rhodes eliminated a significant Christian corsair base and consolidated Ottoman control over the eastern Mediterranean. The most dramatic of Suleiman's early European campaigns culminated in the Battle of Mohacs on August 29, 1526. The Kingdom of Hungary, weakened by internal divisions among its nobility and lacking strong leadership, was unable to effectively counter the advancing Ottoman army. At Mohacs in southern Hungary, the Ottoman forces, employing their superior numbers, disciplined janissaries, and devastating artillery, inflicted a catastrophic defeat upon the Hungarian army led by the young King Louis II. Louis himself perished in the rout, and his kingdom effectively collapsed. Suleiman occupied Buda, the Hungarian capital, though he did not initially annex the entire territory. The death of Louis II without an heir plunged Hungary into a protracted succession crisis, with Ferdinand I of Habsburg, Archduke of Austria, and brother of Holy Roman Emperor Charles V, claiming the throne through marriage ties, while a faction of Hungarian nobles elected John Zapolya, voivode of Transylvania, as king. Suleiman chose to support Zapolya as a vassal king, thus drawing the Ottomans into a long and complex conflict with the powerful Habsburg dynasty. This rivalry led directly to Suleiman's first siege of Vienna in 1529. Marching up the Danube in support of Zapolya and aiming to strike a decisive blow against the Habsburgs, Suleiman laid siege to the Austrian capital. However, the Ottoman army faced significant logistical challenges due to the long supply lines and unseasonably bad weather. The defenders of Vienna, though outnumbered, put up a stout resistance. After several weeks of inconclusive assaults and with winter approaching, Suleiman was compelled to lift the siege. While the failure to capture Vienna marked a limit to Ottoman westward expansion at that time, the campaign itself demonstrated the vast reach of Ottoman military power and caused immense alarm throughout Europe. Further campaigns into Hungary followed, notably in 1532, when the Ottoman advance was famously delayed by the heroic but ultimately futile defense of the small fortress of guns, Kojeg. These conflicts gradually led to a de facto tripartite division of Hungary: Ottoman Hungary, central and southern parts; Habsburg Royal Hungary, western and northern parts; and the Principality of Transylvania as an Ottoman vassal state, a complex arrangement that would define the region for over a century. While land campaigns in Europe were a major focus, Suleiman also presided over a significant expansion of Ottoman naval power, transforming the empire into a dominant force in the Mediterranean. A key figure in this development was Hayreddin Barbarossa, Barbaros Hayreddin Pasha. Originally a corsair operating from Algiers, Barbarossa, along with his older brother Orhan, had established a significant maritime presence in the western Mediterranean. After Orhan's death, Hayreddin pledged allegiance to the Ottoman Sultan, and Algiers became an Ottoman protectorate and a crucial forward base. In 1533, Suleiman appointed Barbarossa as Capudan Pasha, Grand Admiral, of the Ottoman fleet. Under Barbarossa's dynamic leadership, the Ottoman navy launched daring raids on the coasts of Habsburg, Spain, and Italy, challenging Christian naval supremacy. In 1534, Barbarossa even captured Tunis from its Hafsid rulers, though it was retaken by a massive Habsburg expedition led by Charles V himself in 1535. This period also saw the beginning of a remarkable strategic alliance between the Ottoman Empire and France, under King Francis I. United by their common rivalry with the Habsburg Emperor Charles V, this impious alliance between the Crescent and the Lily saw close diplomatic and sometimes military cooperation, and France was granted significant commercial privileges in Ottoman lands, laying the groundwork for future capitulations. Suleiman also turned his attention eastward. The Safavid Empire in Persia, though defeated at Chaldiran by Selim I, remained a significant rival. In 1534 to 1535, Suleiman led his first major campaign against Shah Tahmasp I, the son and successor of Shah Ismail. This campaign of the two Iraqs resulted in the Ottoman capture of the Safavid capital Tabriz for the third time in Ottoman history, and more enduringly, the conquest of Baghdad and the rest of Mesopotamia, modern Iraq. The annexation of Iraq, with its rich agricultural lands, and the historic city of Baghdad, a former capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, was another major territorial and symbolic gain for the Ottoman Empire. Alongside these military endeavors, Suleiman initiated the vast work of legal reform that would earn him the title Kanuni. Recognizing the need for a comprehensive and standardized legal framework for his sprawling and diverse empire, he commissioned the collection, revision, and codification of existing sultanic laws, qanuns, which supplemented the overarching Islamic Sharia. This extensive legal work, carried out by eminent jurists like Lutfi Pasha and later the great Sheikhul Islam Ebu Suud Effendi, covered a wide range of issues, including administrative procedures, criminal justice, land tenure, taxation, and social regulations. The aim was to create a more efficient, just, and uniform system of governance, adaptable to the empire's needs. Pargali Ibrahim Pasha, played a crucial role in many of these early successes, serving as Suleiman's most trusted advisor, Grand Vizier, and commander-in-chief, his influence second only to the Sultan himself. By the mid-1530s, Suleiman had unequivocally established the Ottoman Empire as a preeminent global power, its armies and fleets feared, its governance being reformed, and its influence felt from Vienna to Baghdad and across the Mediterranean. The mid-1530s marked a subtle but significant shift in the internal dynamics of Sultan Suleiman I's court, even as the Ottoman Empire continued its ascent to the zenith of its power. The execution of Grand Vizier Pagali Ibrahim Pasha on March 15, 1536, brought an abrupt end to the career of one of the most powerful figures in Ottoman history. Ibrahim, who had been Suleiman's childhood friend, confidant, brother-in-law, and indispensable Grand Vizier for 13 years, had accumulated immense wealth and authority, acting as the Sultan's alter ego in military and diplomatic affairs. The precise reasons for his downfall remain debated by historians, but likely included his perceived arrogance, the ostentatious display of his power. He sometimes used the title Saraskar Sultan, implying a status almost equal to Suleiman, fears that he might usurp authority, and possibly the growing influence of Suleiman's powerful wife, Hurrem Sultan, Roxelana, who may have seen Ibrahim as an obstacle to her own ambitions for her sons. Ibrahim's execution, carried out suddenly and without public trial, served as a stark reminder of the Sultan's absolute authority and signaled a period where Suleiman would rely less on a single, overwhelmingly powerful minister. Despite this internal upheaval, Ottoman military and naval operations continued with vigor, particularly in the Mediterranean. Hayreddin Barbarossa, as Kapudan Pasha, remained the scourge of Christian naval powers. His crowning achievement came on September 28, 1538, at the Battle of Preveza off the coast of Epirus. Here, Barbarossa's Ottoman fleet decisively defeated a larger Holy League fleet assembled by Pope Paul III, nominally commanded by the Genoese admiral Andrea Doria, who was in the service of Emperor Charles V. The victory at Preveza effectively secured Ottoman naval dominance in the eastern and central Mediterranean for several decades, crippling Christian efforts to challenge Ottoman sea power directly. Barbarossa continued his campaigns, raiding the coasts of Italy and Spain, and in 1543, in a remarkable display of the Franco-Ottoman alliance, the Ottoman fleet, under Barbarossa, wintered in Toulon and cooperated with French forces in the siege of Habsburg-controlled Nice. After Barbarossa's death in 1546, other capable admirals like Pial Pasha and the formidable corsair-turned-admiral Turgut Reis Dragut continued to project Ottoman naval power, capturing Tripoli from the Knights of St. John in 1551 and further securing Ottoman influence along the North African coast. On the European land front, the struggle for Hungary against the Habsburgs remained a constant drain on Ottoman resources and attention. Following the death of John Zapolya in 1540, Ferdinand I of Habsburg renewed his claims to the entirety of Hungary. Suleiman responded with another major campaign in 1541, which resulted in the direct Ottoman annexation of Buda and the central plains of Hungary, transforming this core region into the Ottoman province, Eyalet of Budin. Hungary was now formally tripartite: Ottoman Hungary, Habsburg Royal Hungary in the west and north, and Transylvania, under John Sigismund Zapolya, John Zapolya's infant son, as an Ottoman vassal state. Further campaigns in 1543 saw the capture of strategically important Hungarian fortresses like Esztergom, Gran, and Székesfehérvár, Stuhl-Weissenberg, further solidifying Ottoman control. Despite periodic truces, warfare in Hungary flared up repeatedly, a costly and often inconclusive frontier war. The Eastern Front also demanded Suleiman's attention once more. Despite earlier Ottoman successes, Shah Tahmasp I of Persia continued to probe Ottoman frontiers and offer support to dissident elements. Suleiman launched his second major campaign against the Safavids in 1548 to 1549. While the Ottoman army again occupied Tabriz and made gains in Caucasian territories, holding on to these distant conquests proved difficult. The city of Van in eastern Anatolia was, however, decisively secured and fortified. A third major Safavid campaign was undertaken in 1553 to 1555, partly provoked by Safavid incursions and palace intrigues, suggesting Seyzade Mustafa, Suleiman's eldest son, was in communication with the Shah. This long series of exhausting conflicts finally culminated in the Peace of Amasya, signed on May 29, 1555. This was the first formal peace treaty between the Ottoman and Safavid empires. It recognized Ottoman sovereignty over Iraq, including Baghdad, much of eastern Anatolia, including Van and Erzurum, and access to western Persian territories. While territorial disputes would recur, the Peace of Amasya established a relatively stable border and ushered in a period of peace between the two empires that lasted for over 2 decades, allowing Suleiman to focus his resources elsewhere. Internally, Suleiman's reign was a period of immense cultural and architectural flourishing, truly earning him the epithet magnificent. His commitment to justice and efficient administration continued with the ongoing codification of the Kanuns, meticulously overseen by brilliant legal scholars, most notably the long-serving Sheikhul Islam Ebu Suud Effendi. This legal framework aimed to harmonize sultanic decrees with Islamic law and address the complex needs of a vast and diverse empire. The most visible manifestation of this golden age was in architecture, largely through the genius of Mimar Sinan, who was appointed chief imperial architect around 1538. Sinan's first major imperial commission, the Seyzade Mosque in Istanbul, completed 1548, was built in memory of Suleiman's favorite son, Seyzade Mehmed, who died young in 1543. This was followed by Sinan's crowning achievement, the Suleymaniye Mosque complex, built 1550 to 1557, a breathtaking architectural masterpiece that dominated the Istanbul skyline and included numerous madrasas, a hospital, a library, public baths and shops, serving as a vast socio-religious center. Poetry, calligraphy, miniature painting, and ceramics also reached new heights of excellence, with Suleiman himself being an accomplished poet, writing under the pseudonym Muhibi, lover-friend. However, this era of imperial grandeur was also marked by intense palace intrigue and dynastic tensions, much of it revolving around Hurrem Sultan and the succession. Hurrem, who had risen from a slave girl in the harem to become Suleiman's legal wife and most influential consort, actively sought to promote the interests of her own sons, particularly Selim and Bayezid, for the succession. This brought her into conflict with Seyzade Mustafa, Suleiman's eldest son, by a previous consort, Mahidevran Sultan, who was widely popular with the Janissaries and the public, and seen by many as the most capable heir. During the Persian campaign of 1553, fueled by rumors, allegedly spread by Hurrem and her son-in-law, the Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha, that Mustafa was planning to usurp the throne with army support and was in treasonous contact with the Safavids, Suleiman made a fateful decision. He summoned Mustafa to his tent in the military camp near Eregli in Karaman. Upon entering, Seyzade Mustafa was seized and strangled by the Sultan's executioners in Suleiman's presence. The execution of the popular and talented Mustafa on October 6, 1553, sent shockwaves throughout the empire. It caused widespread grief and resentment, particularly within the army, and deeply affected Suleiman himself. Seyzade Cihangir, Hurrem's youngest son, who was physically disabled but deeply attached to his half-brother Mustafa, reportedly died of grief and illness just a few weeks later. While the execution secured the path for one of Hurrem's sons, it cast a dark shadow over Suleiman's later reign and is often cited as a turning point that contributed to the later decline in the quality of Ottoman leadership, as less capable princes were sometimes favored due to harem politics. The execution of Seyzade Mustafa in 1553, while securing the path to the throne for one of Hurrem Sultan's sons, did not end dynastic strife within the Ottoman imperial family. On the contrary, it intensified the rivalry between Hurrem's 2 surviving sons, the elder Seyzade Selim and the younger Seyzade Bayezid. Hurrem Sultan herself, who had wielded unprecedented influence over Suleiman and state affairs, passed away in 1558. Her death removed a key figure who had, perhaps, managed to keep the rivalry between her sons somewhat in check. Following her demise, the competition between Selim and Bayezid escalated into open conflict. Bayezid, known for his martial spirit, poetic talent, and perceived greater competence, was popular with certain factions in the army and administration, reminiscent of his father in his youth. Selim, on the other hand, was often characterized as more inclined to the pleasures of the harem, and less interested in the rigors of military life, though he was not without his supporters. Suleiman, in his later years, appeared to favor Selim, possibly influenced by Hurrem's earlier machinations, or perhaps viewing Bayezid's ambition and popularity with some military elements as a potential threat, much like Mustafa's had been. As tensions mounted, Bayezid, then governor of Kütahya, felt increasingly insecure. Open hostilities erupted in 1559 when Bayezid marched with his forces against Selim, who was governor of Manisa. Suleiman threw his support behind Selim, dispatching imperial troops to aid him. At the Battle of Konya in May 1559, Sesade Bayezid's army was decisively defeated. Forced to flee, Bayezid, along with his 4 young sons, sought refuge in Safavid Persia, appealing to Shah Tahmasp I. This created a delicate diplomatic situation. Shah Tahmasp initially welcomed Bayezid, perhaps seeing him as a valuable pawn against the Ottomans. However, prolonged and intense negotiations ensued between Suleiman and the Shah. Suleiman, determined to eliminate this threat to Selim's succession, offered Tahmasp substantial financial incentives and political concessions. Eventually, in 1561, Shah Tahmasp acceded to Suleiman's demands. Sesade Bayezid and his sons were handed over to Ottoman envoys or executed by the Safavids themselves on Ottoman instigation within Persian territory. With Bayezid's death, Sesade Selim became the sole and undisputed heir to the Ottoman throne. The brutal logic of Ottoman succession had once again played out, ensuring a smooth transition, but at a terrible human cost. Even in Suleiman's advanced age, the Ottoman military machine continued its operations, though not always with the accustomed success. A major undertaking in his later years was the Great Siege of Malta in 1565. The Knights of St. John, having established themselves on Malta after their expulsion from Rhodes, continued to harass Ottoman shipping. Suleiman dispatched a massive fleet and army to capture the island and eliminate this persistent threat. The Knights, under the resolute leadership of Grand Master Jean Perisseau de Valette, put up a heroic and desperate defense. Despite months of relentless Ottoman assaults and heavy casualties on both sides, including the death of the famed Ottoman admiral Turgut Reis during the siege, the Ottomans failed to capture the island's main fortresses. With the arrival of a Spanish relief force and the onset of the storm season, the Ottoman commanders Piale Pasha and Lala Mustafa Pasha were forced to lift the siege in September 1565. The failure at Malta was a significant blow to Ottoman prestige and was celebrated across Christian Europe as a major victory, demonstrating that Ottoman amphibious power was not invincible. Concurrently, the Ottomans maintained a naval presence in the Indian Ocean and Red Sea, contesting Portuguese influence and attempting to support local Muslim rulers against European encroachment, though these efforts met with mixed success due to the vast distances and logistical challenges involved. Campaigns by admirals like Piri Reis, who had been executed in 1554 after a failed expedition to Hormuz, and Saidi Ali Reis, highlighted both the reach and the limitations of Ottoman power in these remote waters. In his final years, Sultan Suleiman became increasingly withdrawn from the daily affairs of governance and active military command, delegating more authority to his grand viziers. Rustam Pasha, who had served 2 terms and was Hürrem Sultan's son-in-law, was followed by Semiz Ali Pasha, and then, crucially, by Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, a highly capable statesman of Bosnian origin who would come to dominate Ottoman administration. While the Süleymaniye Mosque complex was triumphantly completed in 1557, serving as an enduring symbol of his magnificent reign, the empire began to show subtle signs of strain. Constant warfare on multiple fronts and lavish imperial expenditures placed a burden on the treasury, and the early effects of New World silver influx began to contribute to inflationary pressures. In 1566, despite his advanced age, around 71, and failing health, Suleiman decided to lead his army in person one last time, partly to restore the image of Ottoman invincibility after Malta, and to deal with renewed Habsburg defiance in Hungary. The target was the fortress of Sigitvar, defended by the Croatian-Hungarian nobleman Nikola Subic-Zrinski, Miklos Zrnja. The siege was arduous, and Zrinski and his vastly outnumbered garrison put up a legendary defense, inflicting heavy casualties on the Ottomans. Just days before the fortress finally fell, on the night of September 6th or 7th, 1566, Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent died in his tent from natural causes. His Grand Vizier Sultan Mehmed Pasha, in a remarkable feat of statesmanship and control, concealed the Sultan's death from the army for several weeks. He issued orders in Suleiman's name, maintained the siege until Sigetvar was captured, and prevented any potential mutiny or chaos until Şehzade Selim could be informed and travel from his governorship in Kütahya to secure the throne. Selim II ascended the throne peacefully in 1566, largely due to his father's and grandfather's earlier elimination of all other viable claimants. Known as Sari Selim, Selim the Blonde, and sometimes, less flatteringly, as Selim the Sot, due to his reputed fondness for wine, he marked a distinct break from the tradition of warrior sultans. Selim II was the first Ottoman sultan to largely abstain from leading military campaigns in person, preferring the comforts of the palace. Consequently, the actual governance of the empire fell increasingly to the Grand Vizier. Fortunately for the Ottomans, this role was filled by the exceptionally able Sultan Mehmed Pasha, who effectively managed the state's affairs for much of Selim's reign and into the next. Selim II's disengagement from active rule also allowed for the increased influence of figures within the imperial harem, notably his favored wife and later legal wife Nurbanu Sultan. While the phenomenon often termed the Sultanate of Women, Kadimlar Sultanati, is seen to have its roots in Hürrem Sultan's era, it became more pronounced under less assertive sultans like Selim II, where powerful women in the harem, in alliance with various court factions, could exert significant influence over appointments and policy. The death of Suleiman thus marked not just the end of an exceptionally long and glorious reign, but also heralded a subtle but significant shift in the nature of Ottoman rulership and the internal balance of power within the empire, even as its military and territorial might remain largely intact under Sokollu's stewardship. The reign of Selim II, which commenced in 1566 upon the death of his father Suleiman the Magnificent, ushered in a new era in Ottoman governance, one where the Sultan himself often receded from the daily rigors of statecraft and military command, delegating immense authority to his Grand Vizier. Fortunately for the empire, this pivotal role was held by the exceptionally capable Sultan Mehmed Pasha, who had already proven his mettle under Suleiman and continued to effectively steer the vast Ottoman state for the entirety of Selim II's reign and into the next. Selim II, content with the pleasures of the palace and often referred to as Sari Selim, Selim the Blonde, largely entrusted the empire's administration and strategic direction to Sokollu, who maintained a high degree of administrative efficiency and pursued Ottoman interests with vigor. Under Sokollu's astute guidance, several significant military and strategic initiatives were undertaken. An ambitious, though ultimately unsuccessful, expedition was launched in 1569 to capture Astrakhan from the rising power of Muscovite Russia. The plan also envisioned digging a canal between the Don and Volga rivers, which would have allowed the Ottoman fleet to operate in the Caspian Sea, thereby challenging Russian expansion southward, aiding the Central Asian Khanates, and potentially outflanking Persia. However, the Astrakhan campaign failed due to immense logistical difficulties, fierce Russian resistance, and insufficient support from the Crimean Tatars. This marked the first major military clash between the Ottomans and Russia and highlighted the practical limits of Ottoman power projection deep into the Eurasian steppes. More successful were operations in the south. Between 1568 and 1570, Ottoman forces under commanders like Koka Sinan Pasha and Özdemiroglu Osman Pasha worked to reassert firm control over Yemen, which had been restive under Zaydi Shia imams, thereby securing the Red Sea routes vital for trade and access to the holy cities. One of the most notable military undertakings of Selim II's reign, spearheaded by Sokollu despite some accounts suggesting the Sultan's personal desire for Cypriot wine played a role, was the conquest of Cyprus. The Venetian-controlled island was strategically important, a rich source of agricultural products, and its location sometimes served as a base for Christian privateers disrupting Ottoman shipping and pilgrim routes. Commanded by Lala Mustafa Pasha, the conqueror of Sigetvar after Suleiman's death, Ottoman forces invaded Cyprus in 1570. While Nicosia fell relatively quickly, the fortress of Famagusta, under Marcantonio Bragadin, offered fierce and prolonged resistance, surrendering only in August 1571 after a brutal siege. In an infamous act that marred the victory, the agreed terms of surrender were violated, and Bragadin was barbarously tortured and executed. The fall of Cyprus galvanized a Christian response. A Holy League, comprising Venice, Spain, the Papal States, Genoa, and other Italian states, assembled a large fleet under the command of Don John of Austria, the illegitimate half-brother of King Philip II of Spain. On October 7, 1571, near Lepanto, Nafpaktos, at the mouth of the Gulf of Corinth, the Holy League fleet confronted the Ottoman fleet commanded by Muezzinzadeh Ali Pasha. The ensuing Battle of Lepanto was one of the largest naval battles in early modern history and resulted in a catastrophic defeat for the Ottomans. The Ottoman fleet was shattered, with immense losses in ships and, more critically, experienced sailors, archers, and janissaries serving as marines. The psychological impact on Europe was profound, as it shattered the long-held myth of Ottoman naval invincibility that had prevailed since the Battle of Preveza. However, Grand Vizier Sultan Mehmed Pasha famously downplayed the strategic impact, reportedly telling a Venetian envoy, "In capturing Cyprus from you, we have cut off one of your arms. In defeating our fleet, you have merely shaved our beard. An arm cut off cannot grow again, but a shorn beard will grow all the thicker." True to his word, Sultan oversaw a massive shipbuilding program, and within a year, a new Ottoman fleet, albeit with less experienced crews, was launched, demonstrating the empire's formidable resources and resilience. Indeed, in 1574, the Ottomans, under the command of Koka Sinan Pasha and the skilled new Kapudan Pasha Uluk Ali Reis, Kilik Ali Pasha, an Italian convert who had distinguished himself at Lepanto, decisively reconquered Tunis from the Spanish-backed Hafsid dynasty, securing Ottoman dominance across most of the North African littoral, from Egypt to Morocco, which remained independent. This was the last major military triumph of Selim II's reign. Selim II commissioned the construction of the Selimiye Mosque in Edirne, designed by the imperial architect Mimar Sinan and completed in 1575 after Selim's death. It is widely regarded as Sinan's ultimate masterpiece and a pinnacle of Ottoman Islamic architecture. Selim II himself died in December 1574, reportedly from injuries sustained in a fall in his bathhouse, possibly while intoxicated. His son, Murad III, succeeded him. Murad's first act upon reaching Istanbul was the customary execution of his 5 younger brothers, ensuring an undisputed accession. For the first few years of Murad III's reign, Sultan Mehmed Pasha remained Grand Vizier, continuing to manage the empire's affairs with his characteristic skill and authority. He renewed peace treaties with Venice and the Habsburgs, maintaining a degree of stability. This period also saw the granting of the first significant English commercial privileges, capitulations, to William Harborne in 1580. Signaling the arrival of new European economic and political actors in the Levant, a development facilitated by Sokollu's pragmatic diplomacy. However, Sokollu's long period of dominance and immense power had created enemies and resentment within the Ottoman court. On October 11, 1579, he was assassinated by a Bosnian dervish, ostensibly seeking revenge for a personal grievance, though rumors of palace intrigue and factional plots abounded. The death of Sultan Mehmed Pasha marked the end of an era. It removed a towering figure who had provided stability and strong leadership for nearly 15 years, spanning 2 sultanates. His absence led to a period of greater instability in the Grand Vizierate, with frequent changes of office holders, and contributed to a perceptible weakening of central administrative control. Murad III, like his father, was largely disengaged from the day-to-day running of the empire, preferring the seclusion of the Topkapi Palace and the company of his harem. His mother, Nurbanu Sultan, who became the Valide Sultan, Queen Mother, wielded considerable influence, especially in the early years of his reign, and often in concert with Sokollu. After Nurbanu's death and Sokollu's assassination, Murad's favored concubine and later principal wife, Safiye Sultan, emerged as a dominant political force within the palace. This period is often seen as a clear manifestation of the Sultanate of women, where influential imperial women, through their access to the Sultan and alliances with various viziers and court officials, significantly impacted state policy, appointments, and the distribution of patronage. Murad III's reign also saw a perceived rise in corruption, the the sale of offices becoming more commonplace as various factions vied for power and wealth. Despite these internal shifts, the Ottoman military machine was still capable of major undertakings. In 1578, breaking the Peace of Amasya that had held for over 2 decades, the Ottomans launched a new, long, and arduous war against Safavid Persia, seeking to exploit internal weaknesses in Persia, following the death of Shah Tahmasp I in 1576. Initial Ottoman campaigns led by commanders like Lala Mustafa Pasha and arduous war Osman Pasha achieved significant successes, with the capture of Tiflis, Tbilisi in Georgia, and control extended over Shirvan and Azerbaijan. However, the war would prove to be a protracted and costly affair, stretching Ottoman resources. As the 1580s progressed, other underlying issues began to surface more visibly within the empire. The influx of American silver into the Mediterranean world via Europe contributed to severe inflation, the price revolution, leading to the debasement of Ottoman coinage, the aksi, and causing widespread economic hardship and social unrest. The Janissaries, the elite corps of the army, showed increasing signs of restlessness and indiscipline, their demands for pay and donatives growing. Thus, while the Ottoman Empire under Murad III was still engaged in territorial expansion on its eastern frontier, the death of Sultan Mehmed Pasha had removed a vital stabilizing force, and new internal economic and social strains were becoming apparent, hinting at challenges to come.